the first panel today, entitled "Is Europe Ready for a Judgment of the Communist Regimes?" Just a brief reminder about the rules. So please remember digital rules: no camera on, no microphone on, except for the speakers, of course. And in the question moment, except the asking questions. I would like to especially warmly welcome our speakers today. I will introduce each of them, giving the floor. So, and of course, please, to the speakers, please obey the rule of 15 minutes of speech. So, our first speaker, I will ask to take the floor, Andrea Valic-Zver. Andrea, who is a former director of the Study Center for National Reconciliation, now currently the advisor in the cabinet of the Prime Minister in Slovenia. And she's also a member of the executive board of the Platform of European Memory and Conscience from the very beginning, so very much involved in the projects of the platform, especially the project Justice 2.0. I assume Andrea will tell us more about Slovenian case, but also in the broader perspective, in the perspective of the European Union debates after its enlargement or the change of situation since the fall of communism, so in the last 30 years. So please, Andrea, the floor is yours. Please turn your micro on.
Sorry. Dear Pavel, dear friends, dear participants, first of all, of course, I would like to express my gratitude for inviting me to such an excellent event, which should be, of course, in situ in May, but in Brussels. But of course, due to Corona crisis, we have to be online. But I hope sincerely that we'll see each other very soon. I would like to thank also to all the team, Antoine, Eloise and others. And I'm also very happy that our friend, Nila Winkelmann, is in a way with us. We all appreciate her dedication, her hard work for redressing the atrocities of totalitarian crimes. But Pavel, allow me to start with the title of this panel. It was a question: is Europe ready for a judgment of the communist regimes? Of course, I would like to sound more optimistic, but as a person working on these topics for almost 20 years, I have to be honest and I have to express my concern that the answer to this question or dilemma would be not other than no, not really. But if you put this same question regarding to the situation in some EU member states, for example, Poland or Germany or Hungary, the Baltic states, my reply would be much more optimistic. As to my native Slovenia, I will go back to this case later. So, Pavel, let me explain my opinion in a few reflections. We are all very well aware that since 2004, new member states, and many of them were in the post-communist democratic transitional period, entered the European Union. So after that, this debate on European identity and common European heritage, including totalitarian past, have deepened. And not only politicians, but also white public have been realizing that Europe will not be stable unless it is able to consider this common heritage as a whole. And besides other recognized fascism, National Socialism and communism, and other totalitarian and autocratic systems as our common European legacy, and bring about honest and thorough debate on all the totalitarian crimes of the past century. Now we all know that since then, the EU, the member states, other bodies, institutions have taken several important steps towards evaluating totalitarian crimes. We remember resolutions, declarations of the Council of Europe. Let me remind you of 2008 Prague Declaration, and of course 2009 and 2019 European Parliament declarations, OEC resolution on Divided Europe Reunited, and the Warsaw Declaration, 2010, the European Commission report, etc., etc. Public hearings, conferences on totalitarian regimes have been organized by the European Commission, and especially in the European Parliament by our friends Tune Kelam, Sandra Kalniete, Laszlo Tőkés, Milan Zver, and other MEPs. But anyway, I would like to add that ongoing recommendations in different EU institutions have been put on the table many times. And let me mention only some of the topics. For example, in Fundamental Rights Agency, many times have been proposed a survey in all member states in order to have reliable data on the existing knowledge about totalitarian regimes. Because we all know that surveys in some member states have already shown a horrendous gap in this respect. Another example, equal treatment for the victims of totalitarian regimes. These regimes should be evaluated on the same scale. The third example, a clear international legal framework for free access to archives of security services, secret police, intelligence agencies, which contain information about totalitarian crimes. And many, many more recommendations regarding education, memorials, etc. And least but not last, funding of the platform of Memory and Conscience that was established in 2011, not as let's say, respectful NGO, as many others, but on the basis of the European Parliament resolution. We know that this is a non-governmental organization of more than 60 public and private institutions, organizations from many countries all over the world, not just EU. And the platform has been active in the field of networking, cooperation, research, documentation, awareness raising, encouraging discussions, commemorating victims, and finally strengthening basic European values. And nevertheless, I'm sad to say that, but in spite of various and numerous activities, there has never been any financial support for the platform from the EU funds, which are meant to finance NGOs in the field of the European remembrance. Yesterday, we heard some new promises, and I hope they will come true. In the beginning of my paper, Pavel, I pointed out the Polish example as a good example of dealing with the legacy of totalitarian crimes, especially communist regime crimes. Sadly, I have to put my native Slovenia on the other side of the scale, because you know, you have been involved in this, let's say, you know about Slovenia for many years. No communist perpetrators were put on trial. Archives of the secret political police have been destroyed 30 years ago. No political will is there for regaining these documents, for example, from Belgrade archives. People who violated human rights, they kept their positions, or maybe even gained higher ranks. There wasn't any illustration even in the mildest form, etc., etc. I could go on enumerating, but let me conclude with this case. And I would like to say that, of course, when you're dealing with these atrocities of totalitarian crimes, person, of course, reads a lot. And I would like to remind you of the famous President Reagan Evil Empire speech from 1982, where he pointed out that regimes planted by bayonets do not take root. And he mentioned different events like the Warsaw Uprising, East Germany 1953, Hungary 1956, Czechoslovakia 1968, Poland 1981. And everywhere, again and again, emerged this human, basic, instinctive desire for freedom and self-confirmation. And exactly this powerful and eternal and unstoppable human desire for freedom and dignity, more than 30 years ago, outburst into this magnificent process of the fall of the Berlin Wall, the Iron Curtain fall, the fall of the communist regimes in the Eastern and Central Europe, and new hope for better future, for freedom emerged. And let me remind you of Solzhenitsyn commenter that dictators fell only when people stand against lies with all needed courage. But unfortunately, now 30 years after these events, we could realize that numerous expectations, especially of those who are trapped behind the Iron Curtain, have not been fulfilled. We know also that Europe has been dealing with lots of problems now, such as terrorism, illegal migrations, cybersecurity, extremism, geostrategic instability, rise of undemocratic superpowers, consequences of COVID crisis, etc. And I could risk an estimation that many of them have been caused by the cultural fact that Europe cannot be successful if totalitarian past has not been evaluated in all its vast and horrendous, horrible dimensions. Past could not be changed, but it affects our perceptions, judgments, behavior in the present and in the future. As I have already mentioned, many European declarations and resolutions on memory, truth, and justice have been adopted on many different levels. In spite of that, let's say European memory, or I will allow myself to use the expression European narrative, seems very colorful, very various. I would like to stress the fact that totalitarian experience with communist regimes has not been very high on the agenda. Among other reasons, this is also the consequence of the Second World War defeat of Nazism and fascism, whereas communism survived, mainly due to the pact with Western allies against Hitler. Now, Pavel, if I have some few minutes more, I would just like to enumerate some points, added something to my reflections. I would like to say that EU, especially European Parliament, declared condemnation of totalitarian regimes, also of communism, but there is a visible lack of political will to make further steps. Just one example, erecting of the monument for the victims of totalitarian regimes in Brussels. It has been postponed or whatever. And also the city of Brussels seems to be slow in that respect. The second, I would like to say that concrete steps for implementation of declarations to reality are needed, not only on the level of EU, but especially on the level of member states. Some of them are sadly not capable of condemnation of totalitarian regimes, which has been a heavy burden for reconciliation processes. And in this context, we can observe a special paradox. Initiatives for reconciliation steps have been on the side of victims. Now, my third point is that this lack of political will I mentioned before has been particularly visible on the political left and in the Western countries that had not suffered under the communist regimes. My fourth point, although the initiative to form an international court for the crimes of communism would be useful to strengthen common European values, to help to prevent extremism, intolerance, and recurrence of totalitarian rule in the future. Of course, I'm fully aware of many obstacles, many problems in fulfilling of this idea. As I have already said, the obligation to deal with totalitarian crimes is on the side of member states. In that respect, they have sovereignty on the other, on one side, and on the other side, full responsibility. But nevertheless, I would say that the duty of every true Democrat is to contribute to the process of decomposition of totalitarian structures, patterns, practices, wherever they still exist, or revitalize. And allow me to conclude with the question, has democracy becoming more and more fragile? Yes, I would say that democracy is not set in stone. So we all have responsibility for preserving and strengthening democratic values that guarantee normal future. Memory, truth, and justice are too valuable to be left in the hands of cold bureaucrats. And that's why the activities of the platform has been so important. As I said in the beginning, this is not one of many NGOs in the field of remembrance. It was established on the basis of the European Parliament resolution 2009. And this gives the activities, the work of the platform special and specific importance. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Andrea, for your input, even though it was quite in dark colors. And yes, we have some problems with connecting with Nila Winkelmann, but we still hope she will join us and tell more about the Justice 2.0 project and the activities on that field. But now let's move to the Western point of view. Professor Francois Thom, senior lecturer of history and Sovietology at the Paris Sorbonne University, well-recognized Sovietology and researcher and author of many books on Soviet Union and Russia. Please, Francois, the floor is yours. Please turn your microphone on.
Is it, do you hear me now?
Yes, now it's perfect.
Okay. Okay, thank you for inviting me. I am afraid my point of view will be also quite pessimistic. Europe seems to me less and less ready for a judgment on communism. For, I would say, 3 or 4 reasons. First, because the memory of communism has become very blurry. Ignorance is a big problem. I dealt with this problem as a teaching the history of communism in the Sorbonne, and I could just measure the depths of ignorance about my students, and it was extremely difficult to, I would say it's a question of imagination in some way to make them understand what life was under communism. Not only the crimes, but ordinary life was sometimes quite heavy, difficult. So this is very, this is a problem. The memory of communism is receding, and I would say the communist period now is perceived by the young generation as a Napoleon period, something which is not very relevant to our present. And so there is an effort we have to make an effort to fight this ignorance and to try to, I would say, to elaborate a pedagogy of what was communism, what it was to live under this regime. Of course, the left-wing ideology, which is still very strong in our universities, especially, is also an obstacle. It obstructs any efforts to present communism as it was, and it tends to smudge reality of communism. So that's one of the first reasons, in my view. The second reason is even more preoccupying. It's expansion of relativism in Western thought, especially, yes, in Europe and in America also, to judge communism, to put communism on trial. You have to acknowledge the existence of good and evil, the difference between truth and lies. And our society believes that to be non-judgmental is a virtue. You cannot, it's difficult to pronounce a judgment in our societies. And this applies also to the assessment of communism. Saying that communism was wrong, was evil, it goes against the whole trend in our teaching, in the philosophy of the West, I would say, or the lack of philosophy. It's more to be more exact. So this is, I would say, a fundamental obstacle we are dealing with. The third reason is, of course, the opposition of Russia, because Russia fears that a judgment of communism would help old Europe to restore its moral ground. The aim of Russia was to spread in the West the idea that everybody is corrupt, everybody lies. In other words, there is no real good and evil. Again, there is no difference between good and evil. Everybody is. Russia has tried to encourage the development of a black misanthropy all over Europe, all over the West. Everybody is corrupt, everybody lies, and so on. And judgment on communism would break this trend and would reverse maybe this trend. And this is I would say the deep reason why Russia is so opposed. There are also other reasons, of course, but this is a deep reason. They don't want the West to restore its moral ground. They don't want a reversal of this process. And fourth, my fourth remark, it's to explain, I think we should better explain why such a judgment on communism would be good for Europe, because there is a lot of indifference in Europe about this question. So we have to explain better why it is important and why it would be good for Europe. The main reason, in my view, is that the experience of communism carries lessons which are still valid in the present day. It shows, the main lesson is that it shows how a nihilistic ideology, Marxism-Leninism, which was a nihilistic ideology, could seduce masses and elites and bring total destruction without being checked by a significant opposition. I mean, what happened in Russia, communism remained many, many years without a significant opposition. So this is a question which is highly relevant today, because we are not immune to nihilistic ideologies in the West. There is a very serious trend towards this kind of ideology. It's not Marxist-Leninist, it can be something else, but there is still this seducing, seductive aspect of ideologies, and people tend to think less and less rationally, and this may help the development of destructive ideologies. So reflection on what happened to countries which have adopted a nihilistic ideology is, I would say, very relevant today for the West. So that's what the arguments I would put forward to plead for a trial on communism, and to try to be more active to reach this aim in Europe and in the West.
Thank you very much for your presentation. It is yes, this is also not in very bright colors. So we did not connect with Nila Winkelmann so far. as far as I know, as I was contacting her, she was willing to present the project Justice 2.0, which is a flagship project of Platform of European Memory and Conscience. As I am involved in this work, so I will briefly just say a few words about the project instead of Nila, and then we can move to the discussion. So I encourage each of the participants and those who joined us both via Zoom and on Facebook to ask questions. Well, the project Justice 2.0 is project to bring the justice to the perpetrators, more or less. Its final conclusion should be creation of the tribunal, international tribunal, to judge communist crimes. And within the project, we launched two research projects, and one is quite well developed. It is about killing on the Iron Curtain. This project brought a lot of material, especially concerning former Czechoslovakia, where people were killed on the border of former Czechoslovakia and Austria, and the prosecutor in the Czech Republic launched investigation and prosecution for the former high-ranking communist representatives, those who are still alive. Because it was quite obvious. It came from documents that they not only knew but accepted the killings or gave orders for the killings on the Iron Curtain. This project is showing that we still have a lot to do, not only on national but also on international ground. There are some possibilities to solve the problem, of course, with the International Tribunal. Some ways are unlikely to be realistic, like having the international agreement of many countries to establish such a tribunal, but still the need of such a tribunal or such judgment of communist crimes has also broader support, not only those negative points I would mention here. For example, Bukovsky Appeal last year was signed by many intellectuals, also from the Western Europe. So the works are pending, and I hope there will be some effects. But of course, I'm also not very optimistic about the outcome. Still, however, even the symbolic tribunal would be something very important to have. So now let's go to the discussion. I have three questions from Facebook to all speakers. The first one I will read. The political struggle for recognition for equal treatment of communism and Nazism seems to have peaked in the 2019 European Parliament resolution. Should this struggle now be advanced to a legal path for legislation and justice? So this is the first question to all speakers. Second one, how can the quest for justice about the communist experience in Eastern Europe be embraced by traditional social democrats in Western Europe? This is the second question. And now the third question. Swastikas and other Nazi symbols are banned in, for example, Germany and the European Parliament. Should we ban communist symbols in the same way? And I would ask one more question to Professor Tom about the Russian attitude, because it was, from Polish point of view, it is quite obvious that Russia is opposing any condemnation of communism. But if we look in broader perspective or longer perspective, we can see significant changes, and rather for worse from this point of view. So could you just give us your brief explanation what happened in Russia in those, let's say, 30 years that we are in this moment right now? So please, for the audience, please ask some more questions, and now I give the floor to our panelists to answer those who already have been collected. Maybe Andrea, you will start as you was the first.
Thank you, Pavel. For the first question, I would say yes, of course. In my contribution, I have mentioned many resolutions, declarations, and I think the last one from the European Parliament from September 2019 is a good sign. And I would say, of course, we should go for the legal path in that respect. For the second question, I think it was about social democrat standpoints in Western Europe. Yes, I would say that, of course, they should remember also the trials against social democrats in totalitarian regimes, the persecution of social democrats. So it's part of their history as well. As I said, every true democrat should go against totalitarian regimes and their atrocities. For the third question, it was about symbols. Of course, no democratic state, no democratic society could afford to praise non-democratic symbols. Symbols that bear so many sorrows, so many victims, and the Red Star has been one of them. Sadly, in my native Slovenia, you cannot wear swastika, but you can wear a Red Star. On the level of symbolism, these are all symbols of evil. And for the fourth question, I think Professor Tom would do better than me.
About Russia, yes, it's a very complex question, because I think the main reason, one of the main reasons of Russia's obstruction is the cult of the Second Great Patriotic War, as they say. They want to show themselves as incarnation of the good in front of the evil Nazi Germany. If you draw a comparison between communism and Nazism and show that they are equally evil, all the myth of the Second World War, of the Great Patriotic War, will disappear. And that's one of the founding elements of the Russian imperial ambition. The Second World War was occasion for the Russian Empire to enlarge to Central Eastern Europe. And the Russians still think like that today under Putin. So if you put into question this narrative of the Greek Patriotic War, you put into question also the claim, the legitimacy of the claim of Russian hegemony on Eastern Europe. And this is what the Russians want to avoid, because they still think they have a claim that Eastern and Central Europe are part of the sphere of influence of Russia, and they still think in those terms. So this is what, and that's also a reason to put on trial communism, because it's a way to destroy this this narrative, this Russian narrative, which is dangerous for Russia itself, because it hinders all progress in the relations with Russia's neighbors. As long as Russia sees things in this way, there is no way of normal common life with a Russian neighbor.
Thank you very much. I can see that we overcame some problems, and we have Nila Winkelmann with us. Hello, Nila, it's nice to see you. And we don't have much time, so I will just tell that Nila is former managing director of the Platform of European Memory and Conscience, one of the initiator and the main contributor to the project Justice 2.0. So Nila, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Pavel, and thank you very much, dear friends. Sorry for the technical problems. I have just a short summary of what we managed to do in the Justice 2.0 project, because why did we start this project at all? It has to do with the topic of this panel. Can we achieve an international condemnation of communism? I believe we can. The moment communist crimes start becoming an international affair. After the fall of communism, we did not have the same kind of process of legal retribution and redress like we had after the fall of Nazism at the end of World War II. We had a big international legal procedure going on. We had the Nuremberg Tribunal, we had the Tribunal for the Far East, and the international community contributed to creating a very clear cut between the dictatorship and the new order, which was supposed to be a new, fresh democratic order. Now, after the fall of communism, this didn't happen. And so we have national level prosecution attempts, which have been very dissatisfactory until today, because the post-communist societies are characterized by former perpetrators and their networks of helpers who are still in public offices and who are protecting one another from prosecution on the one side. On the other side, we have the former victims living in society today who are still full of trauma. They are afraid, they have low initiative, they feel helpless, and they are resigned. And we unfortunately have encountered this even in our Justice 2.0 project. The victims of communist crimes and their families are traumatized until this day. So it's been a very hard task finding justice for the communist crimes. Nevertheless, we decided that we would give it a go, and that we would look for international crimes of communism. That means crimes that are not subject to statutory limitations. That means crimes which should be tried even today, where if the perpetrators and victims and witnesses are still alive. We hope that by drawing attention to these international crimes, we will be able to achieve the international condemnation of communism in an easier way. So we started a call in the fall of 2014, a call for cases. We asked our members to tell us about cases of international crimes of communism, which we defined with the help of our international legal advisor team, which we organized to this end, as crimes which are most commonly crimes against humanity. Next to crimes against humanity, you could also consider genocide and war crimes, but we decided to leave those out. We are perfectly satisfied with the category of crimes against humanity because in every country where communists were in power, they committed crimes against humanity. So we had a short period of inquiry among our members, and what of course came up was that we have the killings along the Iron Curtain as a crime against humanity. And we had the best level of research from the former Czechoslovakia, that means from the Czech and Slovak republics. We had the largest amount of data and information, so we decided we would embark on that. Next to the killings along the Iron Curtain, we also identified the mass persecution, the killings, and the mass deportation of the Bulgarian Turks from Bulgaria in the second half of the 1980s, which is also a crime against humanity, which is not spoken about at all until this day. However, for the lack of maybe personnel background and funds, we decided we would first focus on the killings along the Iron Curtain in former Czechoslovakia. We started making this an international issue because, of course, the Iron Curtain has a huge significance. It is the symbol of the division of Europe. It is the symbol of the division between democracy on the Western side and totalitarianism on the Eastern side. It is a symbol of all kinds of other divisions in society that you can think of making people unfree, keeping them locked up in a totalitarian prison for several generations. And so this Iron Curtain is a very symbolic place in Europe, and it should be regarded as such as well. And of course, on the Iron Curtain, people of various nationalities were killed. It was basically a place of international crimes being committed on citizens of various nationalities. So we went into the archives and we found lots of very heartbreaking stories. And we started by making this an international affair by placing a work of art in front of the European Parliament in Brussels. And maybe if I could ask Pavel, would we be able to show a few photographs from that? We picked a case which is really clear to anybody. It is clear to anybody that you cannot shoot a fleeing civilian in his or her back, a civilian who is trying to cross the border just to live in freedom and to be safe from the totalitarian system. There was one particularly harrowing case in 1986, which was a young boy who was 18 years old. His name was Hartmut Tautz. He was an East German student who had just finished high school. And because of political prosecution of his family and because of his unwillingness to serve in the East German army for 3 years, because he was a pacifist and he wanted to study the clarinet, he tried to escape from what is today's Slovakia into today's Austria. He was caught and badly injured by border guard dogs who basically almost killed him. But he would have survived had the border guards provided first aid, which they didn't. So the poor boy bled to death several hours after the dog's attack. And nobody has ever been held accountable for the death of this boy, and no legal redress was offered to the family until we started dealing with it. So, Pavel, if there is a chance to show 1 or 2 photographs from that gallery.
Sorry, I'm trying, but I have to ask our host to do so because I'm not having this option.
Okay.
I will ask. So
it should be done now. It should be done. I name new co-host, and you should be able to share your screen now.
My screen. Well, okay. I have a lot of stuff on my screen. I had sent a link.
I try to, but it's still informing me that host disabled screen sharing to me. So
never mind.
Oh, now I have it. Now I have it.
Okay. So what we did is we organized a group of members of the European Parliament. No, this is the other gallery. There is one before. There are two photo galleries that I wanted to share with you.
So I will turn to the other. Okay.
First one is interesting. We organized a permission to present a work of art in Brussels in front of the entrance to the European Parliament, and we presented a sculpture depicting the killing of Hartmut Tautz in 1986. It was created by an avant-garde Czech artist group called Podebal, who had already been notorious for creating politically involved art. And we had a sculpture which was about 5 by 7 meters made out of plastic, which was, there we go. That is the sculpture that was placed in front of the European Parliament in Brussels. If you're familiar with the entrance, this is Place Luxembourg, the main entrance. And the sculpture was placed there for 7 days, based on a request by a group of members of the European Parliament. We had a grand opening with the Commissioner for Culture, with the mother and the sister of this boy who was killed. And we had a conference in the European Parliament where we also showed a documentary film which we created, showing the unresolved crimes of communism, the families and the relatives of people who were killed on the Iron Curtain, and the families and relatives of people who were killed and deported from Bulgaria to Turkey. This, of course, was a bit of a scandal. As you might expect, the leftist members of the European Parliament were outraged about this sculpture being there in front of the entrance to the European Parliament. I don't know, can we show 1 or 2 further pictures from this gallery?
Yes, but it's okay. Just a moment.
Okay, never mind. Just would have been just an illustration. Of course, surprisingly, it was not only the extreme left that was upset, but it was also the extreme right. And Marine Le Pen herself was outraged about the presentation of the sculpture in front of the European Parliament, because we know that the extreme right in Europe is also getting financial support by Putin. So interestingly, the extremists left and right united and demanded a preliminary termination of that would be the whole gallery would be nice. A preliminary termination of this exhibit in front of the European Parliament. You can see, thank you. Yeah, you can see there are 2 border guards. It's what happened. 2 border guards watching how the dogs are killing the boy. And of course, this is a controversial thing, but by means of using art, we can raise public debate, which really happened. So we were glad about it. We were glad to see the debate in the European Parliament, or at least in the hallways of the European Parliament that happened around it. And we started working on legal redress for the killing of Hartmut Tautz, because it is not possible that the people responsible for his killing are still untouched by any kind of justice. That's the mother and the daughter and the sister of Hartmut Tautz. Okay, if we may see the next, that's the Commissioner for Culture, Mr. Navracic, opening the presentation. If we may see the next photo gallery, is the thing that we achieved in the year after, in the year 2016. We inaugurated a memorial to Hartmut Tautz in the place in the field where he was killed in 1986. That was the 30th anniversary of his death. And we had a huge media attention. We had at least 100 members of the press attending, which was unbelievable. Members of the press and the diplomatic corps who were attending. We had a huge crowd gathering there. And of course, again, the family of Hartmut Tautz came. And so while we were doing this PR, public awareness raising work, we also publicly asked the people responsible for Hartmut's death to apologize. And we had researched about 20 to 30 men who were responsible for the boy's death, the entire chain of command of the border guards, which led all the way to the top of the political structures. That means the last living Secretary General of the Communist Party of Czechoslovakia, the last living Prime Minister of Czechoslovakia, the last living Minister of Interior who was in office at the time, and the whole chain of command of the border guards. And here you can see the second photo gallery from that event. It was in August of 2016. Again, public dignitaries, ambassadors, and you can see this whole crowd is full of members of the press and the diplomatic corps. Several ambassadors came. This was outside Bratislava in Slovakia on a nice sunny day. And this is the memorial, which was created by a well-known Slovak artist. This was to start raising debate and public discussion about this international character of the crimes of communism. And while we were doing this, we also took to the courts. So we were happy to achieve a first rehabilitation of a refugee killed on the Iron Curtain outside Germany. In March 2017, Hartmut Tautz was rehabilitated by the district court in Bratislava. The court, of course, said that this boy was completely innocent and that the criminal investigations that were held against him during the communist regime were unlawful and illegal. And so the civic honor and dignity of Hartmut Tautz was restored the year after we presented this memorial to him in the field where he was killed. This was an opening of another wave of legal redress, which we achieved within the Justice 2.0 project. All the refugees who were trying to escape across the Iron Curtain in former Czechoslovakia, and most of them were East Germans, to apply for rehabilitation with Czech courts. And this has been a big success of our project, because until today, we've had 50 East German refugees who came, stood up, and asked for rehabilitation in front of the courts in today's Czech and Slovak republics. And they have been rehabilitated, and most of them have also already been compensated for the ill treatment by the communist regime, by the imprisonment, by the physical harm. They have been receiving small financial compensations. Just so that you know, the first, again, was Hartmut Tauchs. We managed to achieve a financial compensation for his killing, which amounts to about 3,300 euros, which was paid by the Slovak Ministry of Justice for the death of this young boy. So the human life seen by courts of today's Slovakia is worth 3,300 euros. There was another court ruling by a court in the Czech Republic, which awarded 4,500 euros to an East German refugee who was shot and injured while trying to cross the Iron Curtain, which rendered him disabled, so he could not fully participate in a working life as an adult man. He was paid 4,500 euros. So you can see there is a discrepancy between the evaluation of the different courts of how much human life and health are worth. At any rate, the platform is now addressing both the Slovak and the Czech ministries of justice to do something about the financial compensations, which are not adequate, because 1 day of imprisonment during the communist time today is worth about 3 euros. So some of those refugees have been rehabilitated and compensated in an amount of, say, 7 euros for what happened to them, which is of course ridiculous, because after being caught on the Iron Curtain in Czechoslovakia, the East Germans were returned to East Germany, where they were sentenced to hard prison sentences of usually 2 years. So and their lives were destroyed because they were persecuted. They were not allowed to study. They were not allowed to choose their own occupations. They had a really hard life thereafter. So this is a symbolic compensation which we want to be changed. At any rate, that's a big success, because as of today, it's 48 or 49 people who have been rehabilitated. Another 4 cases are pending in courts. So that's a big success. What we also did in the Justice 2.0 project is now finally asking the international community to sentence the perpetrators responsible for the killings. So we filed a criminal complaint in Poland in 2015 for the killings of people of different nationalities on the border of Czechoslovakia. We filed a criminal complaint in Germany with the Supreme State Prosecutor in 2016 for the killing of 5 Germans. And then in 2017, we filed a criminal complaint with the Supreme Prosecutor of the Czech Republic for the killing of 28 citizens of different nationalities on the borders of Czechoslovakia. And lo and behold, what happened? The fastest reacting was, guess which judiciary? Of course, the German. The German judiciary is known for its reasonable reliability, and there is rule of law in Germany after reunification, and the courts are working. So within about half a year, the court, the Supreme German prosecutor had sent our criminal complaint to the Supreme German Court, the Bundesgerichtshof, and the German court, Supreme Court, decided that the case is going to be investigated, and it was sent to Bavaria. So it's within the jurisdiction of Bavaria, and we have since 2017, there is a team of several policemen and state attorneys from Bavaria. Das Landeskriminalamt München is investigating. That is a famous German criminal unit, which is known from the television series. If you watch German crime series, LKA München is investigating, and they started, of course, investigating against the top ranking perpetrators. That means the last Secretary General of the Communist Party, the last Prime Minister, the last Ministers of Interior. So that's a huge victory of the platform. We have managed to get, for the first time in history, since the fall of communism, an international investigation going into crimes against humanity of a different country, of an Eastern European country. And the platform, of course, cooperates quite closely with the German investigation team. We, in the spring of 2018, we provided all archival material we could find. There were thousands of pages of documents including legislation from the communist time, which needs to be translated into German. We gave all the evidence to the German investigators. And the further development is that in the summer of 2017 or 18, 2 years ago, a joint investigation team was created between the German and the Czech prosecutors. So they are now on the case together, which the German investigators are explaining to me is much easier than if they had to ask for legal assistance based on the European legal support mechanisms for every single investigation step they take. It's much better for them to have created a joint investigation team where the information is passed directly without having to go through excessive administrative steps for each one of them. So the next step that happened, the next thing that happened is that in November last year, so it's a year ago this year, even the Czech police and prosecutors announced that they are opening criminal proceedings against Jakeš, Strugel, and Weiner, the last Secretary General, the last Prime Minister, and one of the last Ministers of Interior, for the killings of refugees on the Czechoslovak border. That was again a huge success for the platform. However, unfortunately, this year, 1 year later, in September, the same district prosecutor announced that they are closing the case against these three gentlemen because the Secretary General of the Communist Party died in the summer, which unfortunately is true, but that the other two gentlemen have Alzheimer and that they are not capable of following any kind of court proceedings or trial because of their feeble mental state. Now, the platform again has had to be alert for this because we went and checked who those medical experts were who gave these attestations which allowed the state prosecution to close the case. It turns out one of them, and this is our most recent press release of yesterday, it turns out both of those medical experts are high-ranking military officers, so they are military medical doctors. And after going into the archives and checking their backgrounds, it turns out one of them, the most senior one of them, is actually a very shady character because at the age of 21, he joined the Communist Party while he was studying medicine at a medical academy. At the same age, at the age of 21, he also got a top-level security clearance by the Communist State Security for strictly confidential matters. And after finishing his studies at the medical academy, military medical academy, he became an officer with the anti-aircraft defense of the Air Force. And he was stationed there in the second half of the 1980s, at the time when Hartmut Tautz was being killed by the dogs. This man was deployed with the anti-aircraft defense forces, and he was a bearer of the highest security clearance of the Communist State Security, which was actually even increased in the year 1986, that he had the absolutely top level of security clearance. So this man, quite obviously, was involved with protecting the state borders because the anti-aircraft defense was there to shoot down lightweight aircraft and hot air balloons if a refugee tried to escape. So we have a highly biased medical expert who is giving an attestation to the last Prime Minister and the last Minister of Interior of the communist regime, telling the world that these men have Alzheimer and they cannot follow a court trial. So this we are protesting this, of course, and the lawyer of the families of the victims, of course, has protested, and we hope that this will open the road. Of course, we sent our archival findings to the German prosecuting team as well, and we hope that this tangle will be resolved. But this is yet again a show that these old boys networks from the time of communism are absolutely ready to protect their friends from prosecution, even 30 years after the fall of communism. And the final nice thing, the silver lining on this cloud again, is that in the decision to stop the prosecution, which is not in legal force as of yet, the district prosecutor says that there is no doubt that what the platform is claiming, that these men are fully responsible for the crimes committed on the borders, that they are fully responsible for the deaths of the refugees. So basically, we hope that this will advance into a court sentence, which will have the same wording, and this will be a complete breakthrough because we will be able to send these men at least to a sentence. We don't need to send them to jail, but to have a sentence for the killings on the Iron Curtain, and we are expecting the German prosecutors to take some steps in the next couple of months, according to my internal information. So it's a very interesting and open scene, And I hope that we will get a lot of international publicity for this. So thank you very much. Keep your fingers crossed for the Justice 2.0 project, because it is hot. It's in a hot phase right now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nila. Thank you for putting some brighter colors to the picture shown before during the panel. Ladies and gentlemen, we had already questions before this last presentation, and we are out of time, so I will take responsibility to finish this interesting discussion. Thank you very much. Thank you, Andrea, Francois, and Nila for this interesting presentations. Thank for the all audience for being with us and asking the questions. Please don't break your presence here, because you will be redirected to small coffee discussions. Of course, unfortunately, we are online, so coffee you have to bring by yourselves, but still the discussion could be ongoing. And let me invite you for the last panel that will start in 20-25 minutes, I think. Which will be entitled, "What would be a joint Ukrainian-Russian history textbook?" So once again, thanks a lot for being with us, and have a nice conversation during the coffee break.
Hello, everybody. Can you hear me?
Yes, I hear you very well.
Yes.
Oh, good. Thank you. Because I couldn't see myself, so it means that it works. So hello, everybody. I'm glad to moderate this panel. What would be a joint Ukrainian-Russian history textbook of the conference Past for the Future, organized by the platform of European memory and conscience, with the European Social and Committee and the Collège des Bernardins. It's my pleasure to greet you, also all those who follow us on Facebook and YouTube. I am Antoine Arjakovsky, Research Director at the Collège des Bernardins. 2 years ago, we started a project with Memorial in Russia, with the Mogila Academy in Ukraine, with the Ukrainian Catholic University in Ukraine also, Russia-Ukraine Commission for Truth and Justice. And we met 2 years with more than 200 intellectuals from all over Europe. And at the end, we wrote a peace plan with 40 proposals. And the first one, on which everybody agreed, was to write together a history textbook on Russian-Ukrainian relations. The idea was to try to do the same project as it was done by French and German historians since 1935. So as you see, it took a long time before, at the end of the 20th century, this textbook was published. But during the whole years, there was a process that helped to facilitate the reconciliation between German and French nation, and to launch also the European project, the European Commission, the European Union. So we understand that it takes time. The same for the history textbook between Germany and Poland. It started already 12 years ago and it is not finished. So it takes a lot of time and efforts. So this is why we consider that we should start. It is not easy, of course, because as everybody knows, there is a war today between Russia and Ukraine. So it is very difficult to work together. And this is why we are very happy to have distinguished speakers, competent and courageous, who accepted to participate in this panel. I would like to introduce them shortly. So there is Nikita Sokolov, who is a famous Russian historian, working as Deputy Director of Research at the Boris Yeltsin Center, which is in Yekaterinburg, but also in Moscow. Anton Drobovich, who is a Ukrainian philosopher and historian, who is the director of the Institute of National Remembrance of Ukraine, and also a member of the European Platform on Memory and Conscience. And finally, Gennady Druzhenko, who is a Ukrainian jurist, a specialist of constitutional law, and the former government commissioner for ethno-national policy. They all accepted to answer to this simple question in 15 minutes, which is not easy. What would be a joint Ukrainian-Russian history textbook? Thank you to all of you that you accepted to speak not in your native language, but you understand that it is important for Western and Central historians, Central European historians, to see that there are historians who are ready to work, who already have done lots of interesting projects, to know about that. And the other good news is also to know that these historians accepted also to work in this methodology of crossed looks on the past, which was presented yesterday, for instance, by Constance Hitzel, the director of the House of Europe Museum in Brussels. So my first question goes to Nikita Sokolov. So you published an excellent book in 2017 in Moscow, the Rusko-Ukrainsky Исторический разговорник Опыты общей истории, the Russian-Ukrainian Historic Handbook, Essays of Common History. Could you present us this experience, and especially could you present the moments of freedom in the history of the two countries where everything could have changed in a better perspective for the joint history of these two nations? Could you give us some examples? And could you tell us also about Karamzin, Kluchevsky, these historians who set the framework of historiography, I would say imperialist historiography in Russia? Mr. Sokolov, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. And first of all, I must apologize for my awful and terrible English. It's just because I have no opportunity to practice for many years. So I beg your pardon. Yes, we have in 2016, we have taken an experience of creating a joint narrative about complex historical persons that are simultaneously present in Russian and Ukrainian history content. In 2017, a Russian-Ukrainian historical phrase book was published. I think it is no need to remind that 2016 was the year when, following the annexation of Crimea, the Russian authorities carried out the most intense policy in the east of Ukraine in the Donbass. So it wasn't an easy task to join war. It wasn't a good time for it. But in any case, I should remind you that the ideology, the preparation for Russian the attack on Ukraine began long before the annexation of Crimea. After the first Maidan in 2004, it took such form that the magazine in which I was an editor considered it necessary to devote a special issue to this problem. Then we published, together with our Ukrainian colleagues, an entire issue of this magazine, Отечественные записки, the Notes of Fatherland, dedicated to Ukraine in order to counter false Russian propaganda. Well, it was the first number of 207 here. After 214, the program naturally became worse. I fully agree with Mr. Alain Lamassoure that public history, in particular in many countries, a school history, a school curriculum, which takes the form of propaganda in the political field, is largely the reason for the aggravation of international conflicts. Mythologized narration of common fate in the past, in the form of popular history, remains one of the most important mechanisms for the formation of national identity. This circumstance is often used by ill-intentioned politicians around the world to mobilize the electorate for cold and hot wars within internal opponents or neighbor state under the banner of restoring historical justice. I also agree with his positive program to seek a historical narrative based on facts and accepting the permissibility of another narrative also based on that. I would just like to emphasize that in this process we are faced with a great variety of points of view, but also with a variety of actors with different intentions, qualities, and capabilities. In our case, the school teacher finds himself in the middle position between the policymakers, authorities, and the position of scientific community. And in this position, the authorities, at least in relation to Russia, is obvious. Then the scientific community position to the statement is the field required mobilization. The Ukrainian-Russian case is particularly complex because the two nations build themselves up to the same rules and have long coexisted within a single imperial body. Now, disputes about the meaning of certain historical events and that are significant for both Russian and Ukrainian historical narrative are conducted according to the rules of the zero-sum game. One of the parties assuming the event person as its own achievement. The second is put it in the need to discredit it as a crime. Something similar happened throughout Europe in 19th century, and this far of memory laid the ideological foundation for two world wars. The modern approach to the problem is to develop a historical optics that allows you to divide the common past as knowledge or value. With this type of division, all parties benefit. In 214 was established independent historical society in Russia to promote scientific ideas about the past. In 216, it took over the initiative of dialogue with Ukrainian historians working in the field of public teaching. Russian-Ukrainian historical Facebook was a completely public enterprise outside of state participation. The initiator was several members of independent historical society. The writer Lyudmila Nitskaya helped us find the funds of the benefactor who wish to remain anonymous. This book is a dictionary of historical images that are significant for both national histories, but are interpreted differently. And each history untried should ideally completely exclude non-scientific states. The authors believe that the most reliable and practically achievable guarantee of such a result could be the joint work of each text of two professional historians who belong to conflicting civil societies and are well acquainted with the real and phantom pain points of native historical methods. The book was born in suffering out of proportions to its modest size. You may see it now. Some very authoritative historians refuse to participate in the work, considering it untimely, unworkable, or in the conditions of acute political confrontation. Others even express the belief that the very possibility of developing such a common lexicon is lost forever. As a result, a gap formed in the collection's fabric, chronologically embracing the entire 19th century, and essentially leaving the entire extremely important process of materialization of the Ukrainian national historical narrative and its corresponding identity outside the borders of published text. However, the compilers did not pretend to complete the dictionary, considered it only as a first experience of such work, which, if approved by the public, will undoubtedly be conceived. Within the framework of popular history, events and entire epochs that are meaningful to the nation are symbolized and closely associated with certain figures of the past, and the personal nature of our dictionary. The selection of persons may seem arbitrary at first, but it seems to reflect objective reality. It is not a big exaggeration to say that this setup is formed by the intersection of two sets of finalists of TV projects, the Russian name of Russia and the Ukrainian famous Ukraine. So the book includes 9 essays about the most controversial characters in our common history, from the medieval princes Saint Vladimir and Andrei Bogolyubsky to leaders of the Ukrainian opposition to Bolshevism, Simon Petliura and Stefan Bender. Each essay was written jointly by 2 historians, Russian and Ukrainian. The process of agreeing of text concepts and searching for exact words was long and dreadful, but in the end, successful. Perhaps the most dramatic was the creation of an essay about Hetman Mazepa. As a result, the authors, the Moscow historian Igor Kulunkin and Władysław Yatsenko from Kharkiv, agreed that both traditional views of Mazepa as a fighter for Kazakh liberties in Ukrainian pop culture, literature, and the villain and traitor in Russian do not correspond to reality. Mazepa led his own complex political line, which ended in failure. So the Moscow authorities then lost confidence in the Hetmanate, and later in the Old Empire, the Hetmans were only able to restrain the aspirations of Romanovs, but Mazepa's successors had neither the strength nor the ability to openly resist. For me personally, the most unexpected thing was the consensus reached by Alexander Kamensky, professor at the Moscow High School of Economics, and Vladimir Myslychuk, a Kharkiv historian, regarding the significance of Catherine the Great's activities for Ukraine. Those measures that are often considered to have led to the loss of cultural identity of Ukraine and its special social institutions, these authors consider as the result of unification within the framework of the enlightened ideology. This complex process of reaching agreement certainly deserves to be made public, even if not in the form of text, but at least in the form of open dialogues and discussions. 2 such discussions took place in Kyiv and Moscow, and also occurred public events. The discussions were open and short, but they were quite correct and confirmed the hypothesis of the initiation of the free book. The development of a mutually acceptable historical narrative of conflicting communities is quite possible on the basis of a strictly critical scientific method. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Nikita. I think also that this is the right approach to take some historical figures of both Russia and Ukraine. Let's say, as you say, Volodymyr the Great or Mazepa, and to have two viewpoints from Russia and from Ukraine, and to be self-critical also in order to propose a joint history. This is very important, and it's a good news that it is possible to do it both in Moscow and in Kiev and in Ukraine. So thank you so much. I would like now to give the floor to Anton Drobovich. As I said, you are the head of the Institute of National Memory in Ukraine. And you have also taught at the National University Dragomanov in Kiev. You published a very interesting book, and you gave it to me when we met in Kiev, on the mythology of the Second World War, which is important, as Françoise Thom said at the previous panel. Do you think that a joint textbook would be possible with Russian in that case of a joint criticism of wrong mythology of the past, both from the Ukrainian and Russian viewpoint? Do you think, for instance, that in Ukraine we would be ready for a critical approach of the mythology of the role of the Cossacks in the narrative developed by Hrushevsky, for instance? So thank you that you are with us, and now the floor is yours.
Hello. Thank you, Antoine. Dear ladies and gentlemen, first of all, I would like to pass my gratitude for the invitation and for the opportunity to share with you my reflections over two issues. First of all, the first is global one, is how history may contribute to establishing peace in the Eastern Europe. And the second one is more concrete. Is it possible a new joint official Ukrainian-Russian history textbook? Of the first issue, I would definitely state yes. The history as an academic science has the whole necessary potential in order to review and to represent the historical truth. So with such a result, with an adequate knowledge about ourselves and about our neighbors, there might be possible to build a stable and honest peace. For example, as it is with the case with Poles, over the events in Volyn in 1940s, when it was possible for our countries to use the formula, we forgive and ask for forgiveness. Theoretically, it has to work, as it is hard to find more stable and consolidating circumstances for understanding, at least in communication with people, that a common catharsis of forgiveness and further acceptance of each other based on a sincere desire to become better together. So in this case, propaganda and manipulation do not work for a result. Only the history works, a science that is seeking for reliable and many-sided knowledge about the past. However, the problem is not in the history, but in the ethics and politics, I suppose. Even in the area of ethical and political context, the problems start because someone cannot forgive, or it is hard for another one to become familiar with the scary and humiliating things about the community. And another one is interested in transforming the historical battle and misunderstanding into potential 10% votes of conservative electorate in the upcoming elections, for example. So the results of the historical research might be known for those who understood it, but that does not mean that this historical truth has a chance to go to the public arena and to become a universal fact. The world of politics is very often built on the binary oppositions that do not take the half-tones, problematic and many aspects of the historical gray. The history may hold to bring to understanding two sides, where no side is a saint one. Here, the chance for mutual forgiveness and high enough, especially if there is a real strong motivation for peace and unity. However, harder is the case when the history demonstrates that one side is very unjust than another's one, and everyone knows about it. Here, the staff of the historical process encourages forgiveness, redemption, and compensation from one side. But what kind of society is able for that without preparation, and how long this preparation will take? I would like to remember that the German society after Second World War needed not a year for that, as well as the purposeful efforts of the thinkers working on the level of Karl Jaspers in order to demonstrate the phenomenon of guilt, to help to realize it and to work out the constructive practice for overcoming it. The second issue is about textbook, finally. Theoretically, such a textbook is possible, official textbook. However, I evaluate the possibility to work out in and to use it as very low. First of all, because of the fact that the Russian-Ukrainian war is going on. And for Ukraine, such a textbook with Poles, and second, for Ukraine, such textbook with Poles or the Hungarians might become more important for mutual understanding. For example, why textbooks only with Russia? It's not a priority. Yes, it's important. Yes, it's possible, but I don't know that it's extremely priority for us. However, if we are reflecting about these textbooks, there are a few additional questions to be answered before starting the work on the new textbook. Who will write it? For which purpose it is needed? And who will use it? Taking into account the Russia, has launched and still is in the state of undeclared war with Ukraine, has annexed and occupied part of territories of Ukraine, is involved in murder thousands and thousands of Ukrainian military and civilians, has caused that almost 2 million of Ukrainians become the EDPs, as well as massive violated human rights on the territory of Ukraine. We define under occupation of Russia. We define it, understand that Russia will be all means obstacle to access to the truth about the events of 2013, 2020. It's very important for common history textbook. We also see how inadequate the Russian officials react on the attempts to tell the truth about the developments of the 20th century, especially when it goes to the Second World War. The reason is in the fact that many narratives of the Soviet communists and totalitarian regime became the basis of the official narrative ideology of the current Russia. That means that only free, honest, independent, or very, very brave from the state professional may be involved into the work on this text. It's about Russian historians. It is also obvious that the results of these works with the Ukrainian colleagues may not be used in Russia in the foreseeable future. For example, during the educational process in scholars or universities. And that is also under a condition that such a book will not be announced in the Russia Federation as an extremist textbook, because we know the examples when in 2015, for example, the work of Rafal Lemkin about the Soviet genocide was included into the federal list of extremist publications. From Ukrainian side, it is important to involve to the joint work the professionals who are able to avoid any emotional evaluation and concentrate on the history, because this story is a life story for Ukrainians, even historians. About the goals. If the textbook is worked out, the only goal for this textbook might be demonstration of different views on the reasons and the outcomes of the events. However, it will have sense only if the facts and the general historical evaluation will be fully objective and correct. For example, it is possible to analyze and to propose dozens of explanation of the Soviet Nazi military union in 1939, as well as to reflect on its consequence, Pact Molotov-Ribbentrop. But it is not possible to keep silence in this regard on the issue connected to a violation of international agreements, war crimes, and joint responsibility for starting the Second World War. Presentation of different narratives is possible. However, the result might not be in the shy silence of the blatant and obvious truth. If this condition is met, that might become a good training for finding the touch lines and understanding of different historical optics. Yes. In this regard, very interested and important is the research of the social narratives that was realized in 2019-2020 with support of German Ministry of Foreign Affairs by Ukrainian, Russian, and German organization named Common and Different, the research of the narratives in the social sense of Germany, Russia, and Ukraine. Very interesting research. If some try to write textbook or history textbook, they need to read this research. Very interesting. Among others, here is demonstrates the issue of a great difference in perceptives, several historical narratives of our societies about, for example, about Holodomor, about Second World War, Holodomor, about collectivization, etc. And the last point of my speech, who will use these textbooks? If this textbook will be worked out jointly by the honest and responsible historians, it might be used by the pupils and students, at least in Ukraine, if not possible in Russia. Taking into account the congestions of the school curricula, there are more chances for working out such a textbook for students in universities. However, it might be not considerable that the main result of such a project will be even in the didactical area. This project might be more visible in developing the culture of dialogue and will lay the ground for future understanding when Russia will be out from the territory of Ukraine and will compensate for the damage. Concluding my remark, I would like to note that if this textbook will be worked out by the truly honest, and I would like to note that if this textbook will be worked out by the truly honest and responsible professionals, the difference between the Ukrainian and the Russian parts of the content will be not crucial, I suppose. Interesting because different optics, but not crucial. The main issue is to name the things correctly. And your question about myth, yes, we have in Ukraine, we like other nations, we have a lot of myths, including historical myths. The myth and the history of Ukraine and Russia. Yes, sure that Ukrainian discourse also has in its historical myths, for example, about the Cossacks as extremely independent. For example, we have understanding that Cossacks were extremely independent people with self-government community. Only if you put the attention on the facts of the mercenary or the phenomenon of the register. I'm convinced that the official discourse has. Sorry, do you hear me? It's okay. Hello. Okay, I'm convinced that the official discourse has to be based on the facts, but not on the myth. The broad generalization and simplification are very dangerous. In our context, extremely dangerous. Thank you for attention, and thank you for this question.
Thank you so much, Anton Drobovich. It's important for us to hear you and to see that you are ready for the discussion. Although you say that this textbook is not necessarily between Russia and Ukraine, but it could be on the level of Eastern Europe or even Europe, that it should be free, independent professionals, historians, who should be truly honest, critical, and also self-critical, who are ready to work on the cross looks of the past, to integrate also social history, and to work on facts. Thank you. This is a good basis for working together. And of course, we all hope that the war will finish. but we also understand that it is necessarily to prepare the future, because if in the future there is no Putin, let's say in Russia, or then it would be immediately necessary to prepare a serious historical understanding of the past. So thank you so much. And now I would like to give the floor to Hennady Druzhenko, who you told me that you know the book that was published recently in Ukraine, Nierівні брати, Українці та Росіяни від середньовіччя до сучасності, which was written by Andreas Kappeler, the famous Austrian historian, Unequal Brothers. It was published first in German and now in Ukrainian. And we would be very interested to know what you think about this book. If you could present this book and your reaction on the main thesis of the author, Andreas Kappeler, that the history of Russia and Ukraine is asymmetric, and it complicates the telling of the narrative and the position of both nations. Because if for Russians, Ukrainians are Malorossiya, little Russia, then there is no place for the Ukrainian nation. There is no place for a Ukrainian narrative. So what do you think about this? You have also 15 minutes. Thank you. So I think you should switch on your microphone, Mr. Druzhenko.
Good. Oh, maybe this.
Good.
Yeah, great. Thank you so much, first of all, for invitation for this discussion, because I have something to share as academics and as well as a participant or veteran of Ukrainian-Russian war or Russian-Ukrainian war. That is, I want to start from. First of all, I want to stress the differences, at least in English language, between the science as such, like a math, like a physics, chemistry, and humanities. That is quite important differences, because I am, as a lawyer, constitutional lawyer, and most of you are historians, know that it's history, law, not like physics. You couldn't just check you could check some facts, but you couldn't be so precise in the as in the science as such. So I remember I studied a lot of American constitutional law, and in the United States is quite famous expression, one of the Supreme Court justice who in the 1930s says, Constitution is what the judges say it is. In our case, history is what historian and now a lot of politicians say the history is. And that is a problem now. That is a problem with our common or intertwisted, rather, history of Russian and Ukrainian relationships. Because as Anton quite correctly highlighted, we are still in the state of war. Every week, thankfully, not every day now, but every week somebody killed in the front line, killed by the enemy. And unfortunately, really unfortunately, Ukrainians and Russians are now enemies. And the conflict, even though in the de-escalated last time, it is still an armed conflict. I witnessed a lot of victims of this conflict because 5 years in my biography, in my past, I led maybe biggest and most ambitious medical project on the front line. So it is very difficult to be objective, to not be emotional when you see how your brothers, your friends, your like a fellow just killed or exploded, or you see a lot of ruined buildings. And that's why I believe, even though that we need some common, at least try to create some common narrative more or less objective. It is premature task because German and French, that is classic example, could start to say, to speak or to discuss about the joint history or joint look on their history just when they reconcile, when they reconcile, when the fighting stopped, and at least Germany recognized their wrongdoing, their war crime. No such signs that Russian now have some, are ready to say, Ukrainian, sorry, I was mistaken. We are ready to return you at least Donbass, and for sure the Crimea, it is a problem and it is the issue, but more complicated than Donbass. But it is time to at least try to speak each other. My favorite political figure and political great figure is Nelson Mandela, who led fight against apartheid in the 20th century. And in his amazing biography, The Long Walk to Freedom, there is a whole chapter, Talking to Enemy. And for Ukrainians, I don't know about quite well situation in Russia. It is really time to talk to our enemies, talk and hear them. Because unfortunately, the war is working in very specific ways. You should mobilize your followers, your fellow citizens, and just dehumanize your enemies to just fight more or less successfully. So for last 6 years, we really try to understand, to look for Russians through the lens of their crimes, their wrongdoings, their imperial ambitions, and so on and so forth. And what we almost lost, especially under the President Poroshenko and predecessor of Anton my friend, by the way, Vladimir Petrovich, on the head of Institute for National Memory, that the fact that Ukrainian was co-creator of both Russian Empire and the Soviet Union. So it is impossible even to imagine Russian Empire in the 18th, 19th, especially in the 18th century, and the Soviet Union without Ukrainian input and without Ukrainian as such. That's why the Russians still feel Ukrainian separation like a tragedy that is far less emotional when they speak about Middle Asia, even about Caucasus, than when they speak about Ukrainian and our separation from Russian narrative, Russian history, and Russian current and future. That's why that Unequal Brothers, that is really a very good book, because it's remind a lot of facts which are lost from both sides, just because of war between two peoples. And that is very, very important to remember another truth of the history. At least for me, it was some facts I didn't know before I read. And some figures was very persuasive, at least that Ukrainian Renaissance, just a real Renaissance of Ukrainian identity, Ukrainian culture, Ukrainian history happened just in the 20th year of the Soviet time. Never before in such scale, in such power, in such really scale. So, for us, I believe that this book, that is a very good thing that it has been translated into Ukrainian. I think that some private people as me, and maybe the institutions like an Institute for National Memory, should some advertise this book as a possibility to reconcile our, as I say, Armenian narrative. You know that the tragedy of Nagorno-Karabakh just happened on our, just we witnessed it a couple of weeks ago. And the root of the tragedy is that both nations, I know quite well from the both sides this conflict, not just even couldn't imagine hear each other. That is really very parallel realities which never crossed each other. So for us, for Ukrainians, and for those Ukrainians who took part in the defense of our country, our independence, our territorial integrity, it is time to recognize fundamental fact. Russia will not collapse in the today, tomorrow, or even day after tomorrow. The Russia is quite special country. We don't like Russia as it is now, but it is like just a reality. We could live with it or try to live in our own myth. Far more promising to live with, recognize the reality. Yes, we have a Russia, we have a occupied Crimea for a long time, and maybe it would be far more similar to the Baltic country stories, which occupation of which has been never recognized by the West, but West cooperated with the Soviet Union quite well, especially Central European countries. And start our discussions, at least with Russian liberal intellectuals, with some academics, with some scientists, from this recognition, okay, we have some situation on the front line now. It is always better to speak than to fight, than to shoot each other. Let's try to speak and at least hear each other truths, each other history, each other narratives, even without accepting that. Because unfortunately, during the active phase of war, we lost our ability to listen other side, and to understand something which is not right, but clear, at least for me, that really Russian establishment fear the NATO missiles on NATO, NATO soldiers on their western front line border, and things like that. Because Ukrainians sometimes believe in very naive and infant narratives that all nations are absolutely free and independent. It is just not true. If I lived for a while twice in the United States of America, and if you believe that all nations are true, that you just should to look to Latin American countries and US, most democratic leader involvements in the affairs of the Cuba, for example, yes? Independent country, why not? So what I really afraid of, that Ukraine, if Ukraine and when Ukraine want to become like a vice versa of the European Cuba, like a very aggressive, very mobilized, very militarized state, just which count our success through the Russian falls. So I believe that history real history of Ukrainian participation in the creation of the Russian Empire, our focus and more deep studies of the historical figures like Feofan Prokopovich, Bezborodko, Kochubey, who was leading Russian Empire figures, and as well 20 years as a possibility of Ukrainian Renaissance within the Soviet Empire. Finally, we got our independence because Ukrainian Soviet Social Republic was formally, for a long time, formally and quasi-independent state with willingly joined the Soviet Union. So I think that, I started from the point that history is what historians say it is. So I think now highlight not the things in the Ukrainian history which separate us from the Russia. And it was a really long time when we jointly with Poles and Lithuanians fight it against Moscovia for ages, for ages. But to at least try to look without emotion in the periods and in the facts, in the narratives when we cooperated and have some fruitful outcomes from our cooperation with Russia. At least the Unequal Brothers books not highlighted, but mentioned the fact that Ukrainian was just impossible in the middle of the 17th century because it was quite fragile, small proto-nation, proto-state, which couldn't afford to fight with three enemies: Poles, Ottoman Empire, and Moscow on the east. So that for Ukrainian elites, which was thought strategically at the time, it was the last possible evil. And with Russians, we decided our problem on the south, now the south until the sea, Ukrainian, then decided our problem on the west, and just then it was possible to arise the issue of full Ukrainian independence and emancipation from the Russian Empire. And finally, what we should understand and recognize that empire, both empire and the Soviet Union, wasn't the Russian ethnic project. It was far more complicated and far more diverse multi-ethnic project. That's why Ukrainian could make the career, fantastic career. Some of secretary generals of the Council of the Empire was Ukrainian. And I think it is time to look for this more strategic and more peaceful narratives and highlight it, because it could pave the way in future, at least to speaking to each other, not just quarrel with each other, not just fighting with each other. And then maybe after the Putin, or doesn't matter, I don't know future and nobody knows, it create common fundament for future reconciliation. Because unfortunately, sometimes there is no choice but to fight. But fighting, that is really tragedy for both peoples from both parts of the front line. And now it is time to speak, at least try to speak with somebody in Russia who are ready to hear. Maybe start from speaking about our common, at least part of the common history, and in such a way to prepare a common ground of speaking about some peaceful, at least peaceful coexistence in the future. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for your presentation, which is very useful for us right now, because on one side, of course, you are cautious. You remind the reality of the war, but on the other side, you are also a realist. And this is why you consider that it is important to speak, to listen each other, and you appreciated, if I understood you well, the book of Capeller, Ni Riv Ni Brate. This is, I don't see if you see it, a good book, which is a good start, which is a good basis for further discussion. And you propose also a more complex analysis of the past, including the question of the empire. I would add the question of the theology, the wrong theology of the empires, from both sides. That would be useful. So thank you so much. We don't have a lot of time, but I see that there is some questions, and I would like, for instance, I saw that there is a question from Nikita Sokolov to Mr. Drobovich. What do you think about the latest historiographical book of Mr. Kasyanov? Could you answer briefly to this question, please? Mr. Drobovich, if you are...
I know Professor Kasyanov, and very interesting scientist, and we have interesting and difficult conversation about memory policy in Ukraine. But about books, part of them not not enough accurate for representative all situation in Ukraine. But in general, it's interesting books.
Okay, thank you. I will read another question to Ukrainian and Russian colleagues. What do you think about the possibility of a Russian, Ukrainian, Belarusian textbook as a common project? Maybe Mr. Sokolov, you would like to answer to this question about the idea to include Belarus.
Not with Lukashenko as a Russian president.
I see.
And also, I had to add one phrase about some mistake. Our Ukrainian colleagues sign the equal sign, put the equal sign between Russian society and Russian government. It's a mistake.
Oh no, I do not believe that the Russian government and Russian society is the same things. Fortunately, I have a lot of Russian friends. Some of them are, by the way, historian, which we met in the Fulbright studies in the Washington DC. So we are just communicated, and I know that there is a lot of normal Russians who are really sorry about this conflict. But another reality is that Putin is still very popular politician in the Russian society, and that is another fact.
Okay.
May I?
Yes.
Yes, we understand that this is not the same Russian politics and the Russian society. But where are the millions of protesters? Where? We have a real war. Where are millions of protesters?
Oh, yeah.
If we don't see these protesters in Russia, that means that a lot of Russians is neutral.
At least.
It's if it's okay for you that your soldiers killing our soldiers and you drink a tea, okay, but this is not the same. But this is not enough.
I see. I have maybe a final question because we are already at 12:30. How can such, I think from Facebook, how can such a textbook breach the current positivist academic worldview embedded in the Russian establishment, embodied by works such as Alexander Dugin's Foundation of Geopolitics? So, Mr. Sokolov, what do you think about this positivist academic worldview in Russian universities? And what do you think about this book of Dugin?
I never think about books of Dugin.
You don't know this book, but what do you think about?
I think all the books of Dugin are out of the borders of any humanity science.
I see.
It's not good subject to discuss.
I see. Do you think, Mr. Sokolov, that it would be possible one day to organize a discussion with the Boris Yeltsin Center in Moscow or in Yekaterinburg about historiography? Because the question is about positivist academic worldview. Do you think it would be possible to have such a discussion with Ukrainian historians or Western European historians? Do you think that it would be a good thing to do, or it's not the right time?
It's a good thing, it's a good plan, and we can realize it just now in online form, and later offline. We will be glad to see our colleagues from Europe. Okay.
Thank you. Well, thank you to
Antoine,
everybody.
maybe a little question to Nikita, Mr. Sokolov.
Please.
Mr. Sokolov, what do you think about school book, historical school book, common Ukrainian and Russian, I suppose, 2020, 2012? I suppose.
Do you mean the book of Tairova?
No, not Tairova. Не Татьяна Таирова. Нет.
So I don't know what you.
Okay.
Right.
Mr. Drobovich, have you heard about a book, an official book, which is about Russian-Ukrainian history in 2012? I never heard about that book. Did you read it? Did you see it?
I don't see, but I hear a lot about this, and our pro-Russia Minister of Education during Yanukovych time, Tabashnik, says that it's a very good book, but I don't see this book, and I'm curious what is the book because Tabashnik says that it's very good book for reconciliation, etc., but I don't know. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. I think we need to finish. I would like to thank everybody. I would like to thank our panelists today, because it is, as I said, really brave and courageous to speak right now about this question of history and the question to prepare the future. So thank you so much for all participants also who follow us on Facebook, on Zoom, on YouTube. Thank you for the organizers, also the platform on European Memory and Conscience, the European Social and Economic Committee, the Collège des Bernardins, especially Héloïse Rion and Tobias Tiges, and also our friends from Prague, Teun Jansen. Thank you so much. I hope that we will continue these discussions very quickly through the internet, but also in a more visible way. And good luck for everybody. Thank you. Take care.
Thank you for invitation.
Будьте здоровы. На все добре.
На все добре.
Thank you very much.